Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this event. Thank you so much for joining us today for Mobile Net Zero event, which is our first event since we announced 2 years ago our ambition as a mobile industry to be net zero by 2050. Today, we're also publishing our first State of the Industry report on climate action, so you'll hear about that later today. We've got an excellent lineup of speakers. You will hear from different people talking about policy ambition, industry taking action. You will also hear about some new announcements and some recent announcements made by the sector. I would like to also start by thanking the Race to Net Zero team, which has been a great supporter of this event. It's an important year. We are in the lead up to COP26. It's an important day as well for those of you who are joining us from the UK. I'm sure you've seen the news this morning about the UK announcing some new climate ambition. So we're very delighted to have the champion, the high-level champion, Nigel Topping, joining us later today. And without further ado, I will invite Mats Granreed, the Director General of the GSMA, to open the event. Mats, the floor is yours.
Thank you for joining us today to launch our first in-depth analysis of how the mobile industry is doing against the ambitious climate targets that we have set for ourselves. In February of 2019, the GSMA board set an ambition on behalf of the industry to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 at the latest. The ambition was to reduce our emissions rapidly, and we are doing just that by ensuring energy efficiency, by transitioning to renewable electricity, and by actively engaging with our supply chain, evaluating their level of sustainability and supporting them to manage and reduce their carbon emissions. And mobile technology is also helping other sectors to reduce their emissions through digitization. While the mobile industry is currently responsible for around 0.4% of carbon emissions globally, through digitization, we enable carbon reductions in other sectors that are 10 times larger or equivalent to 4% of global emissions. As we all embark upon a fairer and greener recovery from COVID-19, digitization and climate action are the two big global drivers of change, and they will only become more and more important. Last month, the European Commission launched the European Green Digital Coalition to promote digitization that supports decarbonization. Now, we're proud that of the 26 founding members that signed up to the declaration, half were from the mobile sector. The mobile industry has been leading like this for some time now. February 2016, we were the first industry to fully commit to the 17 SDGs, and since then, we've been contributing to every one of the goals with a particular focus on SDG 13, climate action. Today's launch is the first annual check-in on how we are doing against the ambitious target that our board set. So how are we doing? Well, I don't want to steal too much of Stephen's thunder, as he will be taking you through the key findings from the report. But what I will say is that we have come a long way since the Paris Agreement, with 80% of the industry now disclosing to the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP. But we also know that there is much more to do. In the run-up to COP26, we invite all our members to disclose to CDP and to align with the race to zero. Now, we are proud to be recognized as a breakthrough sector by the race to zero, with 36% of the industry by total revenue now committed to net zero. And we are also proud to be recognized as an accelerator organization by the race to zero, acknowledging all the work we have been doing on our ambition. The mobile industry stands firmly at the forefront in facing up to the climate emergency. And so we call on all governments to align their carbon reduction targets to net zero by 2050 at the very latest, and to create a suitable energy market frameworks for businesses to access renewable electricity at competitive prices. We all have our unique part to play if we are to meet the challenges the global climate crisis. With those words, thank you very much and enjoy today's session. Thank you and bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, Matt, so much for setting the scene. Before we hear a little bit more about the report, as you mentioned, I'm delighted to invite the European Commission to join us. And today we have Gérard de Graaf, who is the Director for Digital Transformation in DG Connect at the European Commission. Mr. de Graaf, I invite you to take the floor now.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Matt, and also for the very kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. In former times, I used to be actually Director for Telecommunications, and then I had very good relations with the GSMA, so it is good to be back, and also good to be back for a good purpose, which is the greening of the sector, but also the contribution that the sector can make and technology can make, of course, to other sectors that are also facing significant challenges to bring their CO2 emissions down. I was particularly struck that the GSMA set the target of net zero by 2050, actually before the European Commission or the new European Commission under the leadership of President von der Leyen set the target formally, also in a binding way, in the Green Deal. So that, I think, means that you are a true leader, you're a true trailblazer, and therefore we welcome it very much that the GSMA has embraced and is partnering with the UN Race to Zero campaign. And as Mats already said, you are the first industry of its kind globally to do so. So that really deserves a lot of credit. It shows the vision and the leadership of your organization and of your members. I mean, 2050 sounds like a long time away, and there's a lot to be done. I think it's tremendous challenges, but also opportunities in changing our societies and our economies. But let's also not lose sight of the short and medium term. The Commission has proposed as a target for 2030 minus 55%. So we need to really get going very, very quickly. And for the industry, particularly for the ICT industry, it also means that it recognizes it's not only part of the solution and an important part of the solution, but it is also itself part of the problem. So the first, certainly, kind of priority should be to keep the CO2 emissions of the sector itself in the low single digits before then starting to reverse it towards the net zero. And that's, I think, will require some really quick steps. And I'm very pleased to hear that you're on your way, that the GSMA, will hear more about that later this morning, is moving in the right direction. And only in this way can the ICT sector and the mobile sector be the kind of credible partners for other sectors from energy, transport, construction, agriculture, etc. Well, we are aware of the huge potential that ICT has. I think it's very easy to say and fair to say that without technology, we are not going to get to net zero by 2050. The technology that exists today has tremendous potential to reduce CO2 emissions. And of course, with further innovations and breakthroughs, that potential will only increase. And the figures speak for themselves. I think your study shows that 2 billion tons of CO2 equivalent can be reduced by using technologies. That is 10 times the footprint of the ICT sector. In sectors like energy, sectors like building, kind of energy efficiency of buildings, minus 70% is possible with the technology that exists today. In transport, minus 37%. One thing we know is that we need to work on consistent methodologies to assess, to really evaluate the positive impacts of technology. And otherwise it'll be hard to gain the confidence of the sectors and also to encourage investors to invest in technology. Well, that takes me to the European Green Digital Coalition that was launched 1 month ago. I mean, we did play a role, but I mean, we need to give credit to where credit is due, is that the industry that stepped up to the plate. 26 CEOs signed the declarations. There are more signing every day. Siemens has now announced it will join, for example, and 13 of those came from the mobile industry. So that is very positive. And the European Green Digital Coalition said we will do 3 things: a commitment to net zero by 2040, so acceleration, working on consistent methodologies to assess the impact of technology on reducing carbon emissions. And thirdly, to invest and support other sectors to also embrace technologies for the benefit of fighting climate change. So that now needs to start. I think we're very positive about the effect that we can expect from the European Green Digital Coalition. We are also very hopeful and expect kind of support also from the GSMA as a global organization to get, say, this message out into the global community and reach out to partners in other geographies and other jurisdictions. So here we are. I mean, it is a tremendous challenge and an opportunity, as I said earlier. It is a marathon, but at the same time a sprint. We need endurance. The difficult parts are still ahead of it, but we also need to start very quickly and make progress and show that actually we can get there. So this is my message. It's a positive message. It's a thank you so much message to the GSMA for its leadership. It is a message of support. The European Commission stands next to you, stands behind you, will support you. And of course, we're very much looking forward to working together towards this critical target that we must achieve and we may not miss, which is the race to net zero by 2050. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you so much for those words, Mr. de Graaf. And I think it's you showed your support from the Commission. I mean, you can count on the industry also to work together with the European Commission on that. And we're going to be talking, you said also about the importance of looking globally. So that's a perfect segue to the next section, which is going to tell you a little bit more about the key insights of the State of Industry Climate Action Report, which we are launching today. And for this, I'm going to invite Stephen Moore, who is our head of climate at the GSMA, to take us through some of the key findings. So Stephen, over to you.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is an increasingly important topic, climate action. And, we're seeing more commitment by countries. We had the EU's commitment. We've heard from Gerard and how supportive they are of what we're doing in the ICT sector. We know that President Biden will be coming out with a new plan for the US later this week. We've had new commitments from China, from Japan and South Korea over the last few months. And just today we had the UK announce an increase in its ambition on climate action, bringing forward targets to 2035, which is fantastic. So it's a great context to be talking about mobile net zero this morning and the state of the mobile industry on climate action. I first of all just want to thank everyone that's contributed to this report, because it's never easy to report for the first time and to decide what to include and how to present the information. But we really wanted to showcase, and I think we have in this report, a broad cross-section of the industry, from those that are just beginning to start to take climate action to those that have been leading on it for many years. And I'd like to say a special thanks to the GSMA team who's worked on this as well. We've built up an incredible amount of knowledge in quite a short period of time on all the climate issues that are related to the mobile sector. And I will try to condense it into a shorter presentation as I can this morning. So one of the things I wanted to open with as a backdrop was to understand the context in which the mobile industry sits in the wider ICT sector and also globally. So looking at the next slide, you can see that on the left-hand side, there are the electricity use of the ICT sector, which is approximately 4% of global electricity use. And then you have an additional 3% from entertainment and media, so TVs, gaming, etc. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the carbon emissions of the ICT sector, which is approximately 1.4% of global carbon emissions. And of that, the mobile sector is actually around 0.4%. And I wanted to show the breakdown of that across fixed networks, mobile networks, the supply chain and customers, really to show that it's important to engage with all of these areas as a sector as we look to bring our emissions down to net zero by 2050 at the latest. So how are we going about doing this? What was the first thing that we did? Well, one of the first things that we did as a sector was set up the Climate Action Taskforce. And you can see the members of the Climate Action Taskforce on the next slide. This is, since we set it up 2 years ago, this has increased from, we're now standing at 50 members. And we have just had 11 members join just in the last year. The reason that we set up the task force was to engage with mobile operators on issues around climate action. And we wanted to do 4 things. So the first thing was to showcase leadership, which is what we're doing with this report today. We wanted to advocate for changes that we need to see that go beyond the mobile sector. So, for example, countries setting ambitious climate targets for renewable electricity to be much more widely available. We wanted to show best practice. What does best practice look like in each of these climate action areas? And we also wanted to carry out research to understand what more we can do in particular areas. So we will continue to work with the task force, and also would like to say that the task force is open to more members, other operators from across the mobile ecosystem. We would like to welcome everyone who would like to join us in the task force. We move on to the next slide. It gives you an overview of what we have been doing around industry climate action. So you can see there in the top left-hand corner our overarching ambition to be net zero by 2050 at the latest. And there is a 3-step process that we have started to reach this goal. So the first is around members' climate disclosure. And as Matt mentioned in his intro, we now have the majority of the industry disclosing. The second is around the mobile industry pathway to zero emissions. And this is something we actually launched last February and has the approval from the Science Based Targets Initiative. And the third area is around members' emissions target setting. And we have reached a breakthrough today, which I'll talk more about. We look to the next slide. Looking at the next slide, we can see how far we've come in terms of climate disclosures. So we have reached a milestone on this in that 80% of the industry by revenue is now disclosing to CDP. And you can see on the right-hand side the scores that have been achieved by those 80%. You can see a significant number are scoring A or A- for their climate disclosures with CDP. And this has actually increased over the last year. We've seen a shift from C and D scores to A and B, which is fantastic. And I think that also reflects the more detailed levels of disclosure, as well as the increasing alignment, the TCFD, which is much more closely linking climate action to the financial metrics of businesses. We will continue to support our members with disclosure through our membership to the CDP Supply Chain Programme. And we're planning to have CDP guidance webinars next month and in June for operators and for suppliers. So this is a really important part of understanding what our carbon emissions are as an industry. We've come really far. There's more that we can do though, and we'll continue to support our members in doing that. We look to the next slide, we can understand how far we've come, not only in disclosure, but also then in that third step I mentioned before, which is around target setting. Again, we've reached a breakthrough in this area. So we now have 65% of the industry by revenue have committed or set science-based targets. And that's about 50% of the industry by connections. Not only this, a significant proportion of the industry has gone even further and committed to net zero by 2050, or in many cases, actually earlier than 2050. That's 31% of the industry by connections and 36% by revenue. So we're really proud to be recognised As Matt's mentioned, by the UN Race to Zero campaign as an accelerator, and we will continue to work with our members to help more of them align their targets to net zero by 2050 or earlier, particularly as we run up to COP26 later this year. You can see on the next slide an overview of climate targets across different countries around the world. So what this shows is if a country has a stripe across it, it has an operator, at least one operator, with that type of target within that country. What this shows at a high level globally is that we have very significant targets across Europe, very significant levels of targets across North America, South America, and Africa and Asia. It's a slightly more mixed picture with strong targets again in Australia and New Zealand. And I think this reflects in many ways the ambition of countries in those areas, but it also reflects the access to things like renewable electricity in different markets as well, and the ability that operators feel to be able to set targets within those particular countries. So I mentioned renewables there. If we look at the next slide, you can see that there are some tailwinds in order to for switching over to renewables and some headwinds as well. What you can see on the right-hand side is quite a number of our operator members, not an exhaustive list, but this is an example of some that have set 100% renewable energy targets and also 50% renewable energy targets as well. We're very happy to see that costs continue to drop. There are better technologies coming on the market, but we also need to recognize that there are many off-grid areas. We need better certification systems. And in many cases, there are still significant subsidies for fossil fuels. That is meaning that the take-up of renewables is slower than it could be. So renewables is one key way in which we'll decarbonize. Energy efficiency, as you can see on the next slide, is another way. And this is a huge cost for our members. So we estimate around $17 billion per year is spent on energy by them. And it equates to about between 15 to 40% of OPEX. 90% of network costs are actually on energy. And we know that transfers of data are rising. So despite the fact that 5G is up to 90% more energy efficient than 4G, 3G, etc., there will be upward pressure on energy use. But there is a huge incentive for operators to continue with their energy efficiency programs. And that showed savings of £400 million that were reported last year through the CDP. We know there's also energy efficiency measures that can be taken at network architecture level, at site level, equipment level, and user equipment as well. There are plenty of opportunities to explore and innovation to exploit. Looking beyond that, though, at other sectors and how we can help them to decarbonise. As Gerard mentioned, a significant number of our European operators are founding members of the European Green Digital Coalition, which will look at how digitisation supports decarbonisation. This is an example from the enablement effect report that we released at the end of 2019, which showed that the savings enabled by digital technologies across the mobile sector are 10 times bigger than the emissions of the mobile sector itself. And if we look at the next slide, you can see some findings from our deep dive into the energy system, Smart Energy Systems report we released this year, which showed that they can save 23% of global carbon emissions by 2050. This is just by making sure that those renewable energy systems are smart, and therefore we're balancing supply and demand in the most effective way. Connectivity will be key to that. Just mention on the last couple of slides a reference to supply chain. So as you could see in the overview of the emissions of the sector, supply chain emissions are very important. We continue to engage through the CDP, through the Joint Audit Corporation, through the We Care initiatives on tackling emissions through our supply chain. If we look at the next slide as well, Adaptation and resilience is going to be extremely important and already is. Fantastic examples from operators such as Singtel Optus around temperature increases in Australia, and AT&T around climatic modelling in the US. And I'll just finish by highlighting that there are many good resources on this, on the last slide, on our website. So we have a climate action handbook, we have our climate policy, climate FAQs, and of course we have this report, the new mobile net zero report, which you can find on our website, and we'll go into much more detail of all the areas that I've covered this morning. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass back over to Alex now.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen. And yes, you can go on our website and download the report. You'll find out more there. Right, so before we move on to the panel discussion, we also wanted to celebrate today some of the operators who've made a recent announcement or are launching new commitments. We've got the CEO of Turkcell, Murat Erkan, who could not be with us today, but has a video recording for a special announcement.
Dear participants, my colleagues and the GSMA team, today I feel privileged to share Turkcell's vision and hard work regarding the most urgent issue of our world, climate change. We are proud to be part of the GSMA's climate action initiatives. At Turkcell, we are committed to use of natural resources by considering the balance of the natural ecosystem and the needs of future generations, aiming at the effective management of our environmental performance. We have many initiatives to reduce environmental impact of our operational activities, while improving our business processes in accordance with sustainable innovation principles. We include our employees and their families, suppliers, investors, and customers. I think next generation technologies and the digital era is changing the way we do business and interact with our customers. We are glad to share some of our inspiring activities which are showcased for this case. The digitalization of the retail stores, our digital services and solutions help our customer do more while minimizing their carbon footprint. Our R&D engineer constantly creates solutions for energy efficiency and less carbon emission using AI technologies. As telco operators, I believe that we are uniquely positioned to do good across many verticals. However, we also have challenges. One of the main challenges mobile operators suffer from is significant electricity consumptions. This consumption can increase mobile operators' carbon footprint and generate a high OPEX. We aim to reduce our impact on environment by reducing our carbon footprint. At Turkcell, we address our energy management practices from two perspectives: the energy we consume as part of our activities and the energy we produce from renewable sources. As part of our mission to ensure optimum use of natural resources and our environmentally friendly business model based on shaping technology, we prioritize the use of renewable energy resources. And the numbers of the year 2020 regarding energy use: 1.6 million kilowatt-hour installed total renewable energy power, 165.5 million kilowatt-hours saving with energy-saving practices, 0.2% of energy consumption from renewables. With our Turkcell Energy Solutions subsidiary established in 2017 as part of the Turkcell Group, we plan to meet our energy requirements from renewable energy sources by having power plants of our own and leasing renewable energy generation capacity from power plants in Turkey with a long-term approach. Turkcell's goal is to become a consistent and transparent electricity energy supplier that operates within the boundaries of private law in the competitive environment in order to supply low cost, and environmentally friendly energy. As the first mobile operator in Turkey, having to obtain Energy Management System Standard certificate, we make use of every opportunity to save energy. Hereby, I am honored to announce that Turkcell is committed to use 100% renewable electricity before 2030. Natural resources are great importance in our sustainable growth mission. We use our technological competencies to produce environmental friendly solutions and provide the most sustainable services to our customer for a better future together. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, and very glad to have heard from Turkcell. We really wanted this event to be truly global, so we're now going to move to Africa. And I would like to invite Charles Molapisi, who's the Group Chief Technology and Information Officer of MTN. MTN recently made a commitment to be net zero by 2040. Charles, I will invite you to join us for a fireside chat with Stephen.
Thank you for joining us this morning. So first of all, I'd like to say congratulations on your new targets that you announced back in February. So you announced targets to be net zero by 2040, and also I think a 47% cut in emissions by 2030. So I'd just like to understand from you to begin with, what was the driving force behind setting these targets?
A big thank you to the GSMA for allowing MTN to participate. You know, I was reading the report that I think they just released today around the mobile net zero 2021 report. And in that report, I think the GSMA makes a point about the mobile sector being so powerful that it can influence the cross-industry decarbonization efforts. And there's a key statement that was made in there that I want to just quickly talk about. It says the mobile industry can lift much more than it weighs in the efforts of decarbonization. And that really aligns with MTN as purpose around, we believe that everyone deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. You know, so when we talk about a modern connected life, we're talking about a life where we're bringing internet access to our people, we're bringing digital inclusion, we're bringing education inclusion to our people, internet access across all the markets in which we operate. But the question is, how will that life look like? We're saying as a business that life must be sustainable. We're saying that we must deliver our people into a sustainable and a healthy planet as we go forward. So the whole ambition is anchored around our purpose. This is not something that we do as a by the way. It's primarily anchored on our ambition to say every single person deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. And we believe as an organization, we believe in the future of a healthy planet.
That's fantastic to hear. It's fantastic to hear the ethos behind your targets. So you set these targets and you believe in this vision to align these targets to a sustainable Africa, for example. And you've gone for a target that's actually 10 years ahead of the ICT sector pathway. So the sector pathway launched last February. You've chosen 2040. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about the decision to go a bit faster, actually, the urgency of it?
Yeah, I think, you know, look at this as a clear acknowledgement by the broader organization. And I mean broader, I mean, you know, from the board down into the exco, executives across the business, all the CEO in the markets and employees across the business. So you pretty much a top down and a bottom up. So look at this as an acknowledgement that as MTN, we take this, like the CEO of Turkcell was saying, as the most urgent issue of our time. So we thought initially that we'll do a 2050, but we realized the urgency that for us to achieve ambitions and that we want to achieve in the content in which we operate, in the markets and societies in which we deliver services, we believe that we can accelerate that. And if you look at the extent of our ecosystem, look at the power of the brand of the organization and what we're able to achieve, we believe as an organization that 2050 is a little bit too far away. The issue is much more critical and it's much more urgent. And that is why, as a business, we thought that let's bring it forward. Let's pull it back from 2050, pull it up to 2040 to accelerate this. And doing this, we believe that we're able to energize and galvanize cross-sectoral, cross-vertical engagements across the continent, to be able to bring many other players into the ecosystem, our partners, our customers, and other players in the industry and cross-industry who can be able to work with us. So, key point is that the issue is quite critical and it's quite urgent, and I think it deserves the attention that a company, like I said, across all the layers of the organization is giving this attention.
Absolutely, yes. It's great to hear the sense of urgency and your commitment and the leadership that you're showing with these targets and the Project Zero program that you're implementing at the same time. How important is energy efficiency going to be in you achieving your targets, the net zero and the cut by 2030?
Yeah, I mean, it's even another way to look at this. I quickly talk about Project Zero, then I'm going to come back to your question. The program that you are talking about, the Project Zero program, which is a program that we've implemented to governize the whole ecosystem across the business, talks about multiple layers. You have to galvanize the commercials, the business, the operating functions, because the decarbonization exercise is a much more bigger transformation exercise. It's not a one division emphasis in the organization. So we've started a program that governises the entire organization, the HR engagements and all of that, the regulatory aspect of the business. And then, the supplier ecosystem mobilization as well. You need to make sure that we have a proper engagement in terms of suppliers, bringing our CPO, our chief procurement officers in engagement with the suppliers who are doing that. But I'm the group CTO, so I'm concerned about the network and I'm concerned about the IT. So on the network side is that, what sort of interventions are we talking about in terms of, electricity or energy consumption, changing the mix, renewable first strategy in terms of the network on the radio sides down into our data centers, and also, power monitoring capabilities to be able to understand we can be a bit more efficient. So there's a whole consolidated set of actions address that, and particularly because of the nature of the market in which we operate, that is still much more diesel-powered, grid-based, in most of the markets. So it's super important for us as a business to have clear interventions around energy to be able to minimize the level of use and be a bit more efficient around that. The second part, of course, is the IT part. Is how we're going to bring in technology in terms of AI capabilities. Reporting capabilities to support the business. So we're supporting the business when we're pushing the intervention on the network side, because it's a big part of that, and also on the IT side. So energy, very, very critical for us as a business on this as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And then sticking with the topic of energy, actually, just the final question I wanted to ask you was around renewables. Moving away from diesel generators, moving towards perhaps more on-site renewables, tapping into renewables in electricity grids. How are you addressing that within your Project Zero program?
Very, very critical. We've rolled out across a number of markets, let's say about 1,400 sites, which are rural based. Again, we say everyone deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. So it means that we must connect the rural areas. But to do so, we must be a bit efficient in terms of how we connect them. So in those markets, we're delivering that through solar technology to be able to power those sites. So that is the clear line of what we're doing to be able to bring renewables in that aspect. However, there's a much bigger scope in terms of our data centers. A lot of exercise we're doing to be able to bring renewables and solar panels and in those technologies as well. Sites roll out at the macro level. There's a number of our markets today who are now putting solar-based technology in powering the sites. That's going to be a critical part of implementation, because what we are saying again with the Project Zero program is that we're now moving away from just ambition declaration. We're moving much more into the practical implementation of the interventions across the value chain. So on the network side, on the radio side, down into the data centers, clear push for renewables. Our mantra now, as we engage a lot of our vendors, we bring a lot of players, we're saying renewable first. That's where we start. So as we commission sites, as we build new infrastructure, the key factor is renewables first. So we're bringing our suppliers to be able to assist us to be able to accelerate the program going forward.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that and diving into a bit more detail around how you're looking to achieve those fantastic targets. We're really proud to include you as a case study in the report, and I'm sure you're going to be an example to many other businesses in the region. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning, Charles.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated, Stephen.
Thank you. And Alex, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much, Charles. All right, so we're now moving to the panel discussion part of the event. So I'm going to invite my three panelists to join me. We've got an excellent panel. So we've got Arlene McCarthy, who is the Special Advisor to the Chairman of Bloomberg, Heather Johnson, Vice President for Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility at Ericsson, and Dorothy Derdy, who is Head of Sustainable Business at Vodafone. So welcome, ladies. I'm very happy to have you with us today. We're going to deep dive a little bit more in some of the topics we've heard about previously. And we'll start with the topic of target setting and how we actually move from ambition to action. So maybe, Dorothy, my first question is going to be for you at Vodafone. You've set an ambitious science-based target. You've set a net zero target, which you actually brought forward by 10 years, so 2040 rather than 2050. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're going to achieve that and why this faster timeline?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Alex. It's very great to be here. And I'm thrilled to hear that this industry is the first breakthrough sector in the race to net zero. And frankly, we can't afford anything less than that if we're going to avert the worst impacts of climate change. So we indeed set a 2030 science-based target and a 2040 net zero ambition last year. So by 2030, we'll be net zero for our operational footprint, by 2040 for our entire footprint. Why did we do that? I think what Charles said very much resonates. Firstly, because fundamentally it's the right thing to do. This is the decade of action, it's a decade of delivery. We really have to accelerate if we want to build back better and have a sustainable, inclusive digital society. Secondly, because we could build on our 1.5 degree science-based target. So we waited for the ICT sector pathway that was mentioned earlier, and it gave us a great way to really model what's needed. And clearly, there's still more guidance coming up on net zero from the SBTi. But I think that clarity that that pathway gave us also confidence that we could get there. And I think thirdly, it's because of the industry we're part of, right? This is a leading industry, and seeing the momentum amongst our peers, amongst our large suppliers, having set or setting an SBT, which means that the big unknown part of the kind of how do you tackle supply chain emissions within your scope 3 became a bit less of a guess, and we had more confidence that we could get there together. So how will we achieve it? Within our own footprint, our operational footprint, electricity use is the lion's share of the emissions. So we're laser focused on energy efficiency, and then have also set renewable electricity targets. So July this year for Europe and 2025 for the rest of our geographical footprint, because we have a large presence in Africa as well. And for scope 3, the part within that where we can take most action is really in our supply chain, our purchased goods and services. And these may be outside our control, but they're very much inside our sphere of influence. So we're working very closely with our suppliers throughout the relationship with them. So another big thing we did last year is we started assessing suppliers' commitments to the environment and to diversity and inclusion when they tender for new work. So these elements are now 20% of the request for quotation process. So that's quite a very large share. So as we select vendors, that will really weigh. And then from there, it's filtered into the onboarding, into audits, rewards, transparency. We have a lot of engagement through the CDP. We work a lot with GSMA, clearly. We're also providing SME suppliers with a lot of guidance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, by working together as an industry and with our whole supply chain, we were confident that we could really move forward in a faster way and accelerate the target.
Right, excellent. Well, you talked about your suppliers and how you're engaging them. So I'd like to bring you into the discussion, Heather, because you represent Ericsson. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about 5G. It's the new buzzword. There's a lot of discussion also about the impact it's going to have in terms of increased electricity consumption, data traffic rising. How do you respond to these claims at Ericsson? I know you've talked about we're going to break through the energy curve. How do you think that's realistic?
Well, if you're asking if I do think it's realistic, the short answer is yes, it absolutely is possible to break the energy curve. And I'm delighted to be here to share some thinking from Ericsson, and also really delighted to have listened to so many in the mobile industry, both from GSMA and operators on this topic. So of course, a main theme we're hearing again and again is lowering the total mobile energy network consumption from today's level, as well as meeting the massive traffic growth challenge is critical. But I would emphasize, I don't think it's just a possibility that we can do it. I think it's a responsibility that we do it together with our customers, with GSMA, really with the ICT ecosystem to ensure that this happens. And really just putting it into some hard numbers, estimates of annual energy costs of running mobile networks are around $25 billion US. So both from a cost and carbon footprint perspective, as we've heard from operators today, it really is one of our industry's biggest challenges. And at Ericsson, I think, similar to what we heard from Vodafone, we're really taking that value chain and life cycle perspective. And so understand that our carbon footprint, the main portion comes from the energy use used in our products. So based on this, we have set reduction targets for our product energy performance that were recognized by the Science Based Target Initiative as well, in line with the 1.5 degree trajectory. And, so I think the energy consumption is set to increase dramatically if 5G is deployed the same way as 3G and 4G were. So, you basically, could see the historical curve going up, 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 but this is not sustainable, not from a cost perspective or an environmental perspective. So thanks to 5G and the standard, as well as our development efforts, it is possible to significantly reduce energy consumption. And our network approach focuses on preparing the network, activating energy saving software, building 5G with precision, and operating site infrastructure intelligently. And, I would just kind of maybe emphasize that we have extensive sustainability research. We've been doing it for over 20 years. And we have demonstrated that mobile broadband is an enabler of sustainable development more broadly. And we're proud to work with customers like Vodafone and really across the industry to evaluate and evolve solutions to address energy challenges and to lead the industry in climate action. Thanks.
Right. Thanks. Thank you, Heather. Maybe just one more question before I move to the finance topic and bring Arlene into the debate. But one more question, just as we talk about energy consumption and the cost of electricity, to you, Dorothy, because Vodafone, you operate in Europe, but also outside of Europe, in Africa. And how do you? There are markets where making the switch to renewable is more challenging. We've heard that before from previous speakers. Like, how do you address that, and how do you face that challenge in those markets?
Yes, that's a very good question and a big challenge indeed. But just to reinforce, first of all, again, we're absolutely first laser focused on energy efficiency. Clearly the kilowatt hour that you don't have to buy is the best one. So over the past, just to bring that to life with a few numbers, because it's actually rather impressive. So over the past 5 years, we managed to keep the energy consumption almost flat, whilst delivering a more than 1,000% increase in network traffic, which basically means that the energy consumption per unit of data traffic has been decreased by 90%. And we'll continue to focus on that. But clearly, we still need to buy electricity. So as I mentioned, by July this year, we'll be 100% renewable sources in Europe, and by 2025 for the rest of our footprint. Because indeed, as you mentioned, there are some challenges in sourcing renewable electricity. And in some countries, the regulations are just less well developed. So, either there's no system in place to manage the generation across the country, or the grids are an issue, et cetera, et cetera. So what we are doing in those cases is really to work together, with other industry players, with governments, regulators, policymakers in those countries to really develop what is needed to develop. And just to bring that to life maybe with an example or two. So in Egypt, we've got an agreement for a large solar PPA, but we're now first still working with the government to actually develop the regulations to allow this to be transmitted across the national grid. So we're putting in place, helping to shape the regulatory environment that will then allow us to go full speed. Likewise, and I really enjoyed the conversation we had with MTN as well. There's some challenges in South Africa, but there again, I think you need to swap from seeing this as a challenge to an opportunity, actually work together and have a positive impact in those countries and shaping the future together. So I like Heather's concept of a responsibility, right? And an opportunity to really have a positive impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it just shows, right? It's a journey. So it's like you set yourself some ambitious targets, and then it's about, how do you bring in the different stakeholders to help you achieve those. We're going to shift the discussion a little bit to the investment side, and how do we actually finance this green transition? And Arlene, you're really at the intersect here of finance and policy. You're the special advisor to the chairman of Bloomberg. He's been critical in bringing the finance community into climate change. One thing that we often say is that one way to achieve net zero to fast track for companies is also to get them to report on their climate risks and opportunities, and get their finance teams on board. So there is the TCFD, the Taskforce for Financial Disclosure, which you've been close to. Like, how do you see that gaining momentum? And I'm thinking especially we have the lead up to COP26. Do you see that gaining more momentum?
Well, firstly, can I say, Alex, how important the work that GSMA is doing really in moving a whole industry sector forward on a path to net zero, because that's going to set the pace for other industry sectors. And as you see more countries committing to net zero by 2050, and we're going to see more of those showing up at UN COP with that commitment, then all industries in all sectors are going to need a plan for that. And in order to have that plan, you need to have transparency and disclosure. And so that's where TCFD really comes in. Transparency is key to helping both governments, policymakers, and indeed investors understand where you as an industry are on the transition to that path. But what I also wanted to highlight really, which I think is not often spoken about, is the benefit to companies in their bottom business line of having a core strategy to become carbon neutral. Because what we've seen, and we've seen more of that during COVID, is that investors are looking to companies really that can demonstrate resilience to future shocks. And those companies, therefore, that are in the vanguard of addressing climate risk, have the potential to attract more capital investment from global markets. So, and if you look at global, I can see that from working with Bloomberg. I can see what the investing trends are. So if you look at ESG flows, in 2020, they were at an all-time high, where we had a record 882 billion euros going into ESG assets. So that means you're going to be, the kind of key investment target for many of those companies, because sustainability is now front and center of active investor portfolio management. So they need to have that reporting disclosure from companies if they're going to make those informed choices. And TCFD is a tool. It's a set of recommendations and a framework to help companies address their own risks, but also to point those investors to where they can pick up on their portfolio. So I guess the answer is that it's good, simple business practice. You will be in a better position to attract investment from global markets. And that those companies that do that will be in the front line, and they will be the front line and the winners, I think, in the race to zero. But if I talk about where we are at TCFD, I think since we launched that in Paris at UN COP in 2015, and Mike Bloomberg and Mark Carney launched the Taskforce together, we've been actually amazed, I think, at the success of it. Now 60% of the world's largest public companies disclose in line with TCFD. We've now seen regulators, central banks, policymakers, and its supervisors are now bringing it into their policy and strategy and using it to support a green recovery now. So it's actually become more important in the context of a post-COVID recovery. And companies that are doing TCFD now represent more than $14 trillion in market capitalization. So again, that we've also seen the UK, New Zealand are moving to mandatory climate reporting. And I would watch this space, because I think on Wednesday, tomorrow, when the European Commission launches its non-financial reporting directive, I expect that TCFD will be part of that kind of foundational building block when Europe now moves to set its own standards in this space. So, and we need that, but we need it globally, because we need to have a foundation that really avoids fragmentation, avoids divergence, so that investors can actually compare and contrast the companies that they want to invest in. So I think there's a big opportunity to get global convergence. And again, we will see, I think, at the Biden Climate Summit now this week, potentially an announcement. You know, the Biden administration has said that they will have a whole government strategy to address climate risk. And again, I expect TCFD to be a part of their disclosure and reporting regime, which I'm sure the SEC as a regulator will also pick up. So we're on a very good path. And I think, as I said, those companies really that are enlightened, and you know, the mobile industry that is enlightened in this space, they're going to do better, but they're also going to be able to comply with new rules faster, because you're already doing it. You did it as part of an own voluntary initiative, and that's where you'll be better placed in the long term.
Yeah, and we'll have the chance to go back to the plans of the European Commission and later on in the panel. But you've talked about investors talking a lot, being a lot more vocal about ESG investment, and that even despite of the COVID crisis. You gave some really interesting number, 882 billion going into ESG assets. Heather, like within a company, like how, it was not the case, even 5 years ago, right? So I'm wondering, like, how has that shifted the way you approach this topic, and you discussed it internally, I would say, within Ericsson across different teams, but also externally, when you think about how you message that, thinking about your investors' relations.
Yeah, it's fascinating to listen to Arlene, because I think there is just so much momentum and, positive, I guess, effects coming from the interest from the financial sector. And as you say, just thinking back 5 short years ago, whenever I would meet with investors, they were the sort of the niche socially responsible investors. I mean, that was really who was interested in hearing about sustainability performance. And you fast forward today, and really, I would say sustainability and investment have gone mainstream, as we're hearing. And so this year I'm meeting with institutional investors like BlackRock, and we're discussing our climate targets and progress in detail, and they really want to understand. And I think, Arlene, to your point, it is really about that comparability. And I think, for a company like Ericsson, of course, this is really good news, because it is enabling us to, really demonstrate the depth and the substance that we have. And, you did ask, though, if this in and of itself is catalyzing a changed conversation within the company. And there, I would say my answer is no, because I think for the simple reason that Ericsson's environmental sustainability efforts have been in focus for over 20 years. I mean, we're a company that's founded and grounded in research and science. And so we have been looking at our life cycle for well over 20 years and reporting on environmental aspects for over 25. So when I speak with Ericsson, with management at Ericsson, we keep focus on what makes us a more resilient and successful company first and foremost. And it also kind of brings to mind where we're talking about I think also the proliferation of ESG metrics and really being I think also gaining momentum and traction. And there's a lot of discussion around the role of companies and really how broadly, stakeholder capitalism is to be embraced. But I would say when you think about it, sustainable business in its broadest sense must take into account customer needs and employee interests to be successful. And so here I see the future is this intersection of good business and doing good. And, the example that I gave earlier on breaking the energy curve is a great example of that. And I would just, again, also reinforce and applaud the efforts of the GSMA, as well as really all our industry partners in, driving that progress and also really clearly linking it to the science and the concrete measurements that we can demonstrate. Thanks.
Thank you. And I guess no was the right answer in that case. It just shows that you think journey from a very, very long time, and very pleased to be working with you on those topics. Maybe to make it a bit concrete as well, let's talk about green bonds, because Dorothy, at Vodafone, you issued some green bonds. I think the first probably in 2019. I know you've published a green bond report as well last year. Have you seen that really, impacting your strategy in terms of, driving investment into energy efficiency, probably IoT, other services, and really enabling your climate strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we're seeing is a lot of things coming together, right? Pushing all in the same direction. So Arlene was mentioning TCFD has had a huge effect on how we have these conversations and who has the conversations, right? And what kind of groups and committees they get put on. Also seeing a lot more engagement with investors and analysts, nearly daily, weekly conversations with them about our planet, kind of achievements, but also about inclusion topics and social topics. So that's really interesting to see as well. And luckily that has moved up on the agenda. But so on our green bond, indeed. So in 2019, we raised 750 million euro with our first green bond after we put out a framework the year before to finance or refinance projects that help manage climate risk and opportunity, so energy efficiency, renewable energy, green buildings, etc. And last year it was oversubscribed, as most of the green bonds are. And last year we did our first report. So what we've already done so far, so we invested in installation of solar and wind on site in 7 different markets, so to reduce clearly the electricity consumed from the grid, and that helped us to save a total of 749,000 tons of CO2. So that was kind of directly reduced from the projects under our green bond. But it also gave us an opportunity to really test using different financial instruments, right, to incentivize these energy efficiency projects. And we used very narrow criteria to select the projects so far. So, only the project that we were very confident would succeed, would deliver significant savings. So it's probably an opportunity to also expand in the future. But clearly, the other impact for me, which goes back to the same point, so clearly impact from an energy point of view, but also very much from an investor point of view, it really helps to add credibility to the overall strategy. So very much kind of in line with what Arlene said as well. And now just recently, VodafoneZiggo in the Netherlands, so our joint venture, has also launched a green bond. So looking forward to seeing the reporting and how they will use the proceeds from that one.
Right. Thank you, Dorothy. Arlene, you alluded to that earlier. You started talking about the work of the European Commission in that field. I wonder, you've been quite close to it, so I wonder if you could maybe unpack a little bit for us the EU agenda around sustainable finance. We're hearing from Dorothy, from Heather, like how you're seeing this becoming more mainstream. You talked about that as well, Arlene. You also talked about the importance of being able to compare the data and the lack of that, perhaps, or the challenge of doing that. So do you see, EU sustainable finance becoming mainstream, and is there a role for regulation maybe there?
Well, I think it's not becoming. I think it is already mainstream. Yeah. I think that is the kind of go-to where people are looking to attract investment. And clearly the EU has a very ambitious climate plan. Wants to be a world leader in terms of its climate action, and it plans to further cuts to greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. That's really very ambitious. And so in order to do that, they're going to have to finance it. I mean, money will need to flow into the right kind of expenditure. And so they've already set in the EU budget from 21 to 27, 30% of that total expenditure of Europe's budget has to be on climate-related projects. So they've already, in a sense, put their money where their mouth is and say, this is how we're going to spend it. They all, obviously, in order to be able to do that, and to meet those targets, will need to attract investment from the private sector. And so the sustainable finance agenda really is about supporting that Green Deal. It's about delivering and facilitating the Green Deal. And it's a whole set of tools and policies on how they're going to mobilize that finance. Disclosure is, for me, I think, is the bottom. It's the bottom of the pyramid. If you don't have disclosure, as we've said, investors don't really know how they're going to where they should be investing, what is green, how they can compare and contrast what's out there. They are developing a taxonomy. I mean, I don't like a lot of these technical terms, but effectively what that means is it's a classification system, for what counts as green investments. And they've got, they're looking within that at climate benchmarks, standards. What standards should we have for low carbon benchmarks? Dorothy just mentioned green bonds. They're going to come forward with EU green bond standards because they don't want to run the risk of greenwashing, where some activities are not green but look like green. So they're trying to make the market credible and comparable in this area. And then, of course, for me, what's very important, because I also work in a global setting, is that in doing this, they really need to make sure that they're working internationally with international partners to ensure that the standards they set for sustainable finance bring together global players around a global set of standards. Because there's absolutely no point in the EU setting a green bond standard, which is only viable for the EU, and China doing something very different, because then you need to have, capital markets are global, so you need to have global standards in this space. And so I think, that they're going to now move forward relatively fast. Again, this week, we will see the presentation of the EU sustainable, the EU taxonomy. So the classification system will be announced this week. The delegated, what they call the mechanisms, delegated acts to deliver that. And that will come out in the communication. And again, I expect TCFD to be very prominent in that as well, as a disclosure tool for that. And then we will see in June their overall renewed sustainable finance action plan. So I think they're genuinely pressing ahead with this. My only plea would be that let's make it global. Let's make sure that the EU framework fits very much into the global sustainable finance framework, so everybody's moving in the same direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's fascinating. I think we could have almost a separate event just talking about disclosure and how to report and ESG reporting. So maybe that's for another panel discussion. The last topic I want to bring up in the panel is about the role of the sector in enabling savings across the wider economy. We heard about that from Stephen. It's what we call the enablement effect. Heather, you were one of the founder, Ericsson, of the Exponential Roadmap initiative, which recognizes that, the role of digitalization leading to decarbonization. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what that aims to achieve.
Absolutely, thanks. I go back to really being science-based, and the science is clear. The world needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030 in order to ultimately reach net zero by 2050. And so the Exponential Climate Roadmap sets a course for how we get there through technology solutions, and to emphasize that are available today, as well as policy, and as we just discussed, sustainable financing. And a key point of the report is just that you mentioned, this enablement effect. While the ICT sector is responsible for 1.4% of global carbon emissions and the mobile sector even less, we have a 10 times enablement effect, which can help the needed industry transformation across sectors like transport, energy, agriculture, which can support a 15% global reduction. So we are an industry of scale, that's for sure, and this is a great contribution towards meeting the global climate goals. And I would say science is really highlighting the colossal risks of inaction and the equally huge opportunities of a fast transformation, which could deliver things like energy and food security, cleaner cities, and economic growth. And really just to emphasize the ICT industry, we are a solutions sector for the climate challenge. And so really, I would say I see investments in mobile infrastructure really as investments in sustainable development, and certainly a net benefit when it comes to reducing carbon emissions. Thanks.
Yeah, Dorothy, that must resonate with you, right, at Vodafone, and that's probably the reason why you were one of the founding members of the European Green Digital Coalition that the Commission mentioned earlier. Can you respond to that? How do you see the Green Digital Coalition helping, to accelerate the investment in those solutions that will enable a greener future?
Sure. So first to say, so at Vodafone last year, we set an absolute target, and we committed to helping our customers reduce their emissions by 350 million tons between now and 2030. So that's the equivalent of the carbon footprint of Italy in 2019. So it's quite a sizable number, and I can give you some examples. I mean, just a very simple one, right? But so smart meters in Guadalajara in Spain we connected 13,500 LED street lights to a central management system. And it helped reduce energy consumption by 68%. I mean, those are huge numbers. In smart logistics, those numbers, reducing fuel consumption by up to 30%, as I think Stephen also mentioned, with sensors and devices. So by joining the European Green Digital Coalition, and we were very, very pleased to be one of the founding members across with 25 others, we really hope to kind of scale this as an industry. So first of all, we need to have one standard, right? We need to speak the same language, all of us. So that's one of the first things we'll be working on. But then another crucial element for us is actually working with the sectors who are the beneficiary, well, not the beneficiaries, but the sectors that we can help decarbonize, because it's all good and well that Heather and I are, sitting here pontificating about the huge and wonderful impact of ICT and connectivity on these sectors. But what we really need is someone from the agriculture sector to sit here and say, I have tested this and this and this, and I have seen these effects. So one, agriculture is kind of, I guess, my favorite example. We have a Spanish wine producer, Emilio Moro, where we implemented a sensing for farming solution. And so it's sensors on the ground with satellite images, measuring temperature, soil conductivity, water absorption, etc. And they actually can help them reach a 20% increase in efficiency. So that's a lot less fertilizer, a lot less water, a lot less pesticides, with clearly a huge beneficial impact on productivity and also for the farmers. But I think it's, the coalition really wants to bring those sectors into the conversation as well. And I think that will really be the breakthrough moment for unleashing the power of this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We're going to be running quickly out of time, so I'm going to give Arlene the closing questions, if you could keep it short, but maybe we're talking amongst industry today. You've heard about industry taking action. I know there is a World Leaders Summit later this week with the Biden administration. You've been an MEP, member of European Parliament for 20 years. What would be, in closing, your advice, maybe on how to best bring together, the political ambition, corporate action, and vice versa? Are we doing the right thing? Is there something we need to do differently? If you had a 30-second advice to the people listening.
Well, I think coalition is a great example of that. Is that the more you can bring policymakers together around the table with business, I think the more you can get to the solutions and the tools. And we certainly at Bloomberg, we launched an EU Green Recovery series, and the purpose of that is to actually not just to have a talking shop or speeches, it's to actually get business and policymakers to share their insights, and for business to be able to say sometimes to policymakers, hey, that just won't work. And you need to look at something else. There needs to be another instrument to do that. So I'm a big advocate, really, for getting policymakers and business together, making progress together. But business needs to understand sometimes we can't go at the slowest pace of a company or industry in the chain. And that's why sometimes we need regulation for the framework to move faster, so that we all move together in a way that we actually accelerate and move forward fast to create the net zero economy together and not in opposition to each other.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Arlene, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot at the end like this. Excellent. I want to thank you, each of you, for taking the time to join us today. It was certainly an inspiring discussion. Thank you for being with us and for your commitment to continue to working with the industry. On that note, it's about time that we close the event, but I want to invite, and I'm delighted to invite to join us, Nigel Topping, who is the high-level champion for climate action at COP26. We're extremely pleased to have you joining us today and have been working with your team, with the Race to Zero team. So I hope you were able to listen to some of the discussions, and I'd like to give you the floor for the closing remarks.
First of all, thank you, Alex. It really is a pleasure to be with you, and I was able to listen to the conversation between Steve and Charles and to that great panel we've just had. And when I took on this role a year ago, I realised that a lot of my job was going to be about pushing other people, but part of it was just going to be about applauding. And so really I want to applaud the mobile industry, GSMA, all of your members for the progress you're making. It's really inspiring, and I think you're one of the first industries that sector has aligned itself to the goals of the Paris Agreement based on the pioneering work you did committing to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think they're really a rare example of an industry having such common purpose. And I actually often refer to your industry and your experience, because you're used to such rapid technology development. I think maybe this has enabled you to be better at the kind of pre-competitive collaboration. If you think about the very process of defining 3G, 4G, 5G. So the fact that we've now got over a third of the world's mobile operators by revenue committed to zero, and almost 2/3 committed to science-based targets is really incredible. It really is at the highest level of sectoral ambition. And we launched the Race to Zero actually less than a year ago. So I'd like to congratulate all of the members who are already in. Of course, those who aren't, come on, let's get the whole industry in. But it sounds like I think we have a good chance of getting a lot further by the time we get to Glasgow. Great to hear MTN joining the race and with all their businesses across Africa and the Middle East. Also like to recognise that GSMA is one of the first Race to Zero accelerators. We've created this, realised that there are some organisations who are crucial to bringing whole industries or peers along. So thank you to GSMA for that. And then a couple of thoughts that really have been discussed in the panel. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Race to Zero is drive what we call the ambition loop, where private sector stepping up creates the clarity and the political space for policymakers to be bolder. And of course, as policymakers raise the floor, as Arlene was just describing, then it makes it easier for the private sector to raise the bar again. I think that's true both at the macro level, like the whole sector being committed to zero raises the possibility of net zero commitments from countries, but also in the kind of micro engagement. I think it was Dorothy was talking about, was it in Egypt, if I remember right, about on the ground we've committed to reducing our emissions. We need to engage with the local policy environment so that it's possible, for example, to enter into power purchase agreements. You really are at the forefront of what we've tried to set in motion. 2 months ago, Alok Sharma, who's the incoming president, launched what we've called the Race to Zero breakthrough challenges. And we've set for every sector 2 challenges. First of all, an ambition challenge to get at least 20% of the key players to be committed in the Race to Zero. Well, you've passed that point now in spades. You're one of the first sectors to do it. In fact, the asset management industry reached that milestone, and we celebrated that a couple of weeks ago. So we're all madly celebrating you passing that milestone on social media today. And then what we're trying to do, and what we really want the COP in Glasgow to be all about, is what the last panel's been talking about. Is okay, we've got ambition, but how do we deliver it? Let's make this the COP of action. And I think everything that I've heard about the amazing progress on energy efficiency, that 90% reduction in energy required per unit of service, and the huge push towards renewables is going to be crucial. I think continuing on those trajectories will allow us to get to the breakthrough outcome which we've set, and we're always happy to raise the bar, is that the whole sector can get to at least 70% of electricity globally from renewable sources. And I know that today, for example, Turkcell have announced that they're going to be 100% renewables by 2030. So maybe if everybody could match that ambition, we could raise the bar on that breakthrough even further. Couple of final points. One is just to recognise that as well as energy efficiency and renewables, one of the keys to the long-term zero emission status of the sector will be a transition to circular economy, so that we start seeing design for circularity, meaning that devices are not adding to the growing pile of e-waste. And then finally, to your point on enablement, really, perhaps a bigger challenge in many ways now facing us than getting to zero. We have this huge momentum, and we're starting to believe in the power of our own ability to innovate our way to zero, is the need to adapt to provide the resilience that communities are going to need as the world inexorably gets warmer and extreme weather events continue to increase in intensity and frequency. I know that you as an industry know about that, given your exposure to business interruption from storms and droughts, and the importance of business continuity to make sure that billions of people who rely on the services you provide can continue to go about their daily lives and to run their enterprises. That's never been more evident than during the pandemic, of course. We have recently launched a race to resilience as like the sibling campaign to the race to zero, and many of the enablement effects which you've talked about really crop up there. I think, Dorothy, you were talking about agriculture. I think particularly, I think of smallholder farmers needing to access to digital services, as well as some of the more sophisticated sensoring technologies that you talked about are going to be crucial in terms of the role that your sector plays in enabling resilience and not just zero. That's why I love the quote. I can't remember who mentioned it earlier about yours being a sector which lifts much more than it weighs. So thank you for your leadership. It is really inspiring, so I applaud you. Let's get the whole of the sector in the race to zero. Maybe let's raise the bar so that the whole sector can get to zero by somewhere between 2030 and 2040 and lead the way for other sectors. And watch this space for more on race to resilience, and we look forward to working with you to getting you involved in that as well. Thank you. I look forward to seeing more progress and more members in the race to zero from your sector by COP26 and beyond. And with that, let me hand back to Alex to close the event. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, we hope and we wish you to celebrate more breakthrough moments with other sectors, certainly in the lead up to COP26. I hope we're getting to the end of the event, so I hope for those of you, we'll leave you with a call to action. If you're not already on the journey to net zero, please do so, and please reach out to GSMA if you're interested to learn more about that. I remind you of the report we're launching today, which is on our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all the speakers for taking the time. We had excellent discussions, lots of insights, and we'll be hosting more of these sessions in the future. Thank you so much. Bye.